Perhaps we'll start with the sort of taking stock, I guess, of the year that has been. Has it been as challenging that as the consumer sentiment data would suggest for Australian retailers?
Thanks, Heidi. It has been a really challenging year, in many ways the most challenging year since COVID for retail, because we've not only seen subdued consumer spending all year, apart from, occasional bursts, and often they coincide with sales activity. But the cost of doing business has been really high for retailers. And of course, that comes from many different directions. It might be insurance, energy costs, supply chain costs in terms of increased pricing from suppliers overseas or even local suppliers. The cost of retail crime has also added to the bottom line. So those have been some of the factors, along with a whole host of distractions for retailers, such as the industrial relations reforms that we've seen, the biggest in decades in Australia. And when I call them a distraction, I mean, really that it's just a lot of change in 1 or 2 year period where there's a lot of execution required, which is a distraction from business as usual for retail.
Did we see any periods of sort of punchy spending though? Because seasonally, of course, Black Friday seemed bigger this year than it has ever been in Australia, and we've just been past Christmas. Have you got the data that shows, whether that was on par with previous years?
There's definitely been bursts of punchy spending, to use your words, and Black Friday was a really good one. We saw a projected 5.5% year-on-year increase in Black Friday sales activity. We have to remember, of course, when it's sales periods that we're looking at a different margin opportunity for retailers, but nevertheless, really exciting to see that continued growth. It is still a young event compared to something like the US Black Friday version, but great to see that it's really charging forward.
What do you think, that the members that you represent would like to see in terms of perhaps making 2025 a little bit easier, particularly as we are still probably at least 6 months out from the RBA starting to join the global easing cycle?
Well, certainly increased confidence for business and consumers is top of the list. We are mindful we're heading into an election cycle, and it's very much a top-of-mind conversation that we're having with political leaders, is having a growth mindset for retail. It is 18% of GDP for Australia. It employs 1 in 10 Australians. It's a really significant contributor to overall economic well-being, and we really need to get retail back on track. Interest rates are really the crux of it when it comes to consumer confidence. Of course, there may be some spending articles in the election strategy, but we're not expecting anything hugely substantial. It's really the interest rate factor that's going to have the greatest impact on consumer confidence and spending next year.
It's interesting because you've also seen data that suggests that, consumers are a lot more selective than ever. Certainly in a lot of other markets, there's more spending on experiences than, on goods. But contrast that against the fact that you're still seeing some of these sort of broader trends focus on ethical production and sustainability. Is that still something that is top of mind for consumers?
Absolutely. It's top of mind for retailers as well. I mean, it's fair to say that retail is a very responsive industry. So if it's important to the consumer, you can bet, they're going to be responding fast. So investing in artificial intelligence is a really big priority for Australian retailers. And it's actually something we'd like to work closely with with governments on in Australia. We feel that it's an important area of growth, particularly for small business. We've seen the increased rise of disruptors like Temu and Shein in this market. In order to compete, Australian retailers really do need to invest in technology and artificial intelligence in particular. Sustainability is another innovation opportunity. We have seen it as a problem to solve. It's now in the camp of a differentiator, an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to engage more deeply with customers. So that does require some investment. And once again, we're saying to governments, it needs to be co-investment in this space. We all need sustainability and environmental concerns to be a big part of our agenda moving forward, and we need to move forward with the community in that area and have some co-investment.
That was my question. Do you think that should be the government's problem to solve, right, when it comes to putting limitations maybe on these suppliers overseas of low cost but ethically, I should say, questionable goods that are coming into Australia?
Look, it's early stages of that conversation. We're looking very closely what's happening in overseas markets, of course, to see what measures have been put in place. We're mindful that in Australia, retailers they're up for the challenge of competing, but we do need to work really closely with government to make sure that the frameworks that are put in place from a policy point of view are helpful and not harmful. And sustainability, again, it's a differentiator for Australian retailers if used well, and that's an area where we'd like to co-invest with government. I mean, there needs to be co-investment in waste recycling infrastructure in Australia. It's not something industry can do alone. It's something that government needs to co-invest in, and Australian consumers need to come to the party too and recognise the importance of that and the role that they play at the end of the day in that chain.
Fleur, really great to have you with us. Fleur Brown, who's the Chief Industry Affairs Officer at the Australian Retailers Association. We'll have a lot more in Australia ahead in 2025 every Tuesday at 10:40am if you're watching in Sydney, 7:40am if you're tuning in from Hong Kong. Plus, tune in to the Bloomberg Australia podcast, delving into the biggest stories shaping the country's role in global business. This is Bloomberg.